All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Ray Christner, and I'm the host of the Psych to Practice podcast. And with me tonight is my usual co host, Paul Wagner. And we are doing something a little different tonight. We're doing a live broadcast of the podcast where we're going to do a little question and answers. And with us is Dr. Carolyn Fiatsky from Littlestown Area School District. So, just to give you all a little bit of background, Paul and I both work for Cognitive Health Solutions. That's our clinical roles. And we have been partnering with Littlestown School District for a number of years, trying to enhance uh, the mental health of students and trying to bring kind of some broader awareness. So, tonight's just part of that collaboration, but we're going to do things different than our usual podcast. Tonight, Carolyn gets to kind of co host for us tonight. So we are going to take questions through the Littlestown Area School District Facebook Live feed. So if you have some questions, please feel free to type them in there. We are going to try to keep this general, though, tonight because our hope is to really reach to a broader audience. So we may not be able to answer specific questions for specific situations, but really kind of looking at the broader topic of mental health and kind of how we help our kids. So, Carolyn, welcome tonight.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I think Paul and I are excited as well. This is something different for us. So, we hope we have no technical difficulties and it gets to be a smooth hour. So, Paul, what do you think? Should we just jump into
Yeah,
questions?
let's do it.
So, Carolyn, we're going to turn it over to you
Oh
and let you
boy.
kind of give us some questions tonight.
All right. So a lot of our questions are coming from experiences that through school and through working with teachers and counselors and just things that seem to come up with a lot of our students. Um, you know, for example, social media is a big one, not just in the high school, but even
Sure.
start at the elementary level. Everybody has a phone. And, how do I get my child to not wanting to be right face on that phone all the time? And then there's always that interaction. And, any suggestions or ideas on how to navigate through that?
Yeah, Paul, so you're our social media guru. So we're going to turn this first one to you.
So I think a lot of times it starts off with like what the expectation is. So is social media typically allowed, or are we pushing back against like what the kind of the set expectations are in the household? I think having really clear and open ones and starting, I mean, ideally at the beginning of the school year. We're not at the beginning of the school year right now. So if we're having issues with it, whether that's there's certain individuals that maybe we're sneaking our phone or we're walking in and we're just not even engaging. Really setting those expectations early about, when are the appropriate times to be on social media, what aren't the appropriate times, and being able to try to connect with what the concern is. So if the concern is, hey, we're not talking, we're not engaging, um, I don't really know what's going on in your life, that's a problem. And in some ways, if we can, whether it's with, our youth and adolescents, or if it's up with teens, setting that expectation of like, what is it that we're trying to get, not necessarily what it is that social media is taking away. I think we can have a very different conversation about what is appropriate social media and what isn't. Some of that varies family to family. But if we're talking about there being barriers to communication, that's a common place that I like to talk with parents and families.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the other piece is really, I think as parents, we have to educate ourselves about social media first. So I'm not very social media savvy. And as my kids were going through this, it was really about me understanding what was appropriate, maybe what wasn't appropriate, and then setting some boundaries. And when we talk about boundaries, one thing I tell parents all the time is if the expectation is we're not going to use social media at the dinner table, then that means nobody uses social media at the dinner table. So if kids aren't going to be on their phones, we all need to do that. And I think setting those kind of boundaries where, hey, when we eat together, it's about conversation and our phones can go charge, they can go somewhere else. I think it is a good boundary to have set. Also, I think, having kids not go to bed with their phones is important. We're dealing with a lot of issues with sleep. We see that more often. And it's not that kids aren't tired, it's that kids' minds are active on whatever they're using. So having a downtime from social media. I know it's tough as a parent. We're saying, hey, set these boundaries, and there's a lot of pushback that can maybe come from kids. But if you set them and you continue to set them, and everybody in the house follows them, it does fall into place after a while. But it's not an instant change. It does take a little bit of time to get those routines in place.
And I like when you're talking about familiarizing yourself with social media. And I think also, as challenging as it can be sometimes, trying to familiarize ourselves with the technology itself. A lot of it tries to empower parental controls and being able to set limitations. I know Apple devices have their screen time. I know that there's a complimentary piece out there for Android users. I'm not familiar with the name of it, but I've had clients show it to me before in sessions. But being able to set up limitations, setting up times when the phone is automatically going to lock itself out or restrict certain applications. And they try to integrate it as best as possible. So if we do need to allow greater access, it doesn't take a ton of time to get in there and switch things over. But what's nice is that we don't then have to get into this fight of taking devices, but rather, it can just be the device becomes a bit inert, and that's really can be a helpful thing.
Yeah, and on that, when I mentioned about really kind of learning about social media, I think it's easy to discount it. And, we do as parents sometimes have to realize it's really a part of our kids' social structure, whether we like it or not. We're probably not going to take that away. It's going to be something that's probably going to be here in some form down the road. So, really just understanding it, and if you aren't very tech savvy, have your kids teach you. My own teenagers have taught me about things. Paul's teaching me things all the time about social media. But it's interesting because I always kind of make comments. I always feel like my dad sometimes, where I go, "Oh, this is a bad thing," and then when I really get into it, there are some good things that are part of social media. It is not all terrible things, but unless we really educate ourselves as parents and kind of get into maybe what it's all about, um, we can have some misconceptions. I know with my own kids, it became easier as instead of just being resistant to it, I really got to understand it and really teach them how to be safe consumers of it. And I think really that's sometimes the best goal is as parents is if we know about it, we can teach them how to be safe and avoid some of the problems.
So,
Absolutely.
so what do
Yeah.
you do now when you're trying to put all of these strategies in place? And like, sometimes a younger child has a temper tantrum. The behaviors start to come out.
Yeah.
Anything on that side to help a parent?
Well, there's always temper tantrums. That's yeah, and yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple things. One is, despite the fact that temper tantrums are difficult, and the kind of the simplest part of this is sometimes we have to ride them out, and we have to keep saying the same thing, and we have to keep having the same expectation. And i- when we have a temper tantrum, and there is some type of a break where maybe the parent goes, okay, just fine, go and play for 5 minutes. That reinforces that temper tantrum to get more extreme next time. And so if a child's prone to temper tantrums, part of it is we have to ride them out. The other part is trying to be proactive. And I talk to parents often about thinking of behaviors in three different areas. There's behaviors that we have to ignore 100% of the time. It's just pick and choose your battles. It's not worth fighting over little things all the time. Too many other important things. There are some behaviors that we have to stick to our guns 100% of the time. Hitting's unacceptable, period. Like there has to be a consequence to that, and we have to stay consistent. But there's kind of a middle ground, and I think there's some behaviors that we have to collaborate with our kids on, and we make the assumption that our kids are just being difficult, but sometimes maybe they don't have the skill to regulate their emotions, and so being proactive and taking some time and saying, hey, like I get it, this is tough for you. When I tell you to get off of video games, man, it's a problem every time. Let's work together to figure out how we can make it easier for both of us. I don't want to have you lose privileges. You don't want to lose privileges. But we can't do that in the heat of the moment. I think the hardest part that we do, and I make the same mistakes as a parent, is um, I think of my best strategies when I'm already upset with my kids and they're upset with me, and it's not going to work. We have to set the groundwork to this at calm moments. So when things are going well, saying, "Hey, how do we work together on this?" It doesn't happen overnight. It takes some time, but it will make a difference over time. It's just a matter of really having good expectations, sticking to them, and collaborating when we need to help build skills. Paul, thoughts on that?
I'm each time I had a thought, it seemed like you were getting right to it. If I can, maybe even just going back and reiterating that piece of, picking and choosing the time. Um, that's one of the most common conversations I have with parents is that um, the heat of the moment is not the right time to have a lengthy discussion, nor is it the
Right.
most effective time to have a lecture. Um, the kid isn't going to be listening. You're going to get frustrated because they're not listening, and then we're escalating. The other thing that I really try to talk with parents to avoid is if we are getting into a back and forth, like kind of conversation or argument match, um, let's try to make sure we're keeping our focus on the topic at hand. So often it can, maybe what's starting off as you're not getting off video games in this specific moment is you never get off video games, and then you're always punishing me, mom or dad, and then it's, well, you're never listening. And do you remember that time last week when you hit so and so? Now we're talking about last week when you hit so and so, and not this
Yeah.
particular moment. So if we can have like if it's a heated conversation, maybe not quite a temper tantrum, but let's keep the focus on the moment at hand, because we're not going to solve all of our past problems in this one argument. We're just going to make this another argument we add onto the pile. So instead, let's try to keeping the conversation focused. So
Yeah, I think that's important, and it because it just keeps escalating. And I think it's one of the flaws of the human mind. Like when we get engaged with those kind of arguments, we bring up a whole bunch of situations that aren't related, and we're trying to make a point, and that's not really the time to make a point. I can't tell you exactly where this came from, but I remember some point in my career reading something where it said, if your kids are in a heated moment, they only hear the first 5 words that you say. So if you're trying to give them a direction and it's over 5 words, they're only hearing the first 5 words. And yeah, I think of myself when I've been maybe upset about something. I'm not listening. I'm not really paying attention to what somebody else is saying. So think about that. And maybe we just have to really minimize it. Dealing with consequences through calmness always is more effective. It's not easy, it takes a lot of work for us to do it, but the outcomes are better.
absolutely.
What about ADHD with students? Obviously, in the school, trying to get that focus component, which ties into just executive functioning skills, not getting homework done, and that tends to be a difficult part for teachers and parents
Yeah.
because their child's all over the place.
Yeah, we could probably spend a whole hour on ADHD.
Yes.
I mean, I think, and I'll kind of let Paul kind of go with this a little bit, but one thing is, we probably should focus on some specific things. I think the thing we hear most often, or at least I do, is homework, and how do we help kids that have attention problems get their homework done. I think in my almost 30 years, it's a weekly conversation that I've had. It's pretty common. Um, but again, there's some basic things to think about. Structure, setting the same time, same place for homework, and really trying to find that time that is that can be followed by something that's engaging for the kids. So they refer to it as grandma's law. Do this, then you can do this type of a response. So having something they can do for fun afterward, I think those real simple things can kind of help. Paul, some
Yeah.
thoughts you have?
Um, Initially, I think It depends on what type of ADHD we're talking about. And
Mm.
really, if we're thinking of it
Sure.
in those three terms of we have the predominantly hyperactivity, predominant inattentiveness, or the combined type. Um, and a lot of these interventions, I think, broadly apply to all, but the way that they're specifically being carried out, I think it depends then on your child.
Mm.
So, but in terms of that, setting up the reward system, I think the other piece is that the reward system is then used as a reward and it's not interspersed, or we're not really kind of having it this free range thing at times, and then at other times it becomes restricted, and sending mixed signals. And so, ideally, if we're having something become a reward system, we need to keep it within this reward system and not then allow for free access to whatever that might be. And that might be hard. Sometimes video games or tablet time, whatever that is a great reward. So, but I don't want to just use it as a reward. So being able to say, oh, maybe there's certain content or certain games that you can play as reward. So maybe, or, we're working towards, having, earning V-Bucks for Fortnite or Robux for Roblox. Like, we can build up those pieces as well. Um, but the other side of the homework is, let's look at the task. With children with ADHD, if we have, multiple things or even multiple things on a worksheet, um, that might be overwhelming and overstimulating. And they're looking at that and it feels like it's insurmountable, impossible. When you as a parent look again and you're like, it's 5 questions. Why can't we just sit down and do 5 questions? But for them, it's this 5 questions, and then maybe there's another homework, another, and it's going to take forever in their mind. When in reality, we know that, hey, if you sat down and maybe did this, we maybe have conversations for me asking you to do homework longer than it would actually take you to do the homework.
Mm.
Um, that's not an effective conversation, unfortunately. But the number of times I've heard parents use it and the number of times it continues to get used, it just kind of shows, hey, it's not getting us where we need it to be. So if instead, if we can look at, let's break it down and let's make sure that we're kind of chunking this out. So if they have multiple assignments for homework, let's just focus on one. Yes, they need to get it all done, but we're only putting one thing in front of them. Things, 10 to even 5 things, let's, if we can cover up the paper, we're just focusing on one problem at a time, and that's the singular focus. um, Another piece of, especially with children with ADHD, that I like to talk about is building momentum and how important that is. So a lot of times we can kind of think like, oh, hey, knock out the hard thing first and then from there it's going to get easier. Children with ADHD, let's flip that and let's start small and build momentum as we're going, thinking of that snowball effect. It's kind of the, well, I might as well mentality. So, I have this done. Well, I might as well jump in and do my English homework. And oh, that wasn't, I might as well jump in and do social studies. Um, but being able to have those potential breaks in between, and not putting like these harsh expectations and harsh timelines on it. I think a lot of times, if I know that I'm being timed and I have to stay within those parameters, that can feel really challenging. But same with like a time test. If we can give, hey, you have the same time, but the time you're not working on this, the timer stops. That's phenomenal. So if they're getting distracted, we're redirecting, we're bringing them back in. But keeping it small, keeping it focused, having that reward at the end. I think when it comes down to homework, those are the common things I'm talking with parents about.
Yeah, I want to jump in. You put a whole bunch of
Oh
thoughts in my
yeah.
head, So, I love the idea of time, and yeah, we're kind of talking about this with kids with attention problems, but I think honestly, kids in general, I think timers are wonderful. If you want to make a great parental investment, go and buy an old egg timer that actually ticks. Don't use your phone.
Yeah.
Don't use. There is actually research to prove that the ticking egg timer in front of a child actually makes a difference.
Mhm.
So go spend, well, they're probably more than $1.99 now, probably about $5 or $6, but it's worth it. I like the use of time because for two things. One is it does help build momentum. I think, if you say, hey, let's worry about how many problems we're getting done. Let's just see how hard you can work for 5 minutes. Let's just get that 5 minutes going. And sometimes the kid's moving, and after 5 minutes, they keep going. Not all of them. Sometimes the timer goes off, and they're like, okay, that was 5 minutes. Let me go take a break. But that's okay. And then we kind of build up to then, 6 minutes and 7 minutes. But I like time because it's consistent where it doesn't matter what you're doing. So it's not based on problems or how many words you write. And we can gradually build kids up with homework. I often use with parents the metaphor of going to the gym. Um, if you're out of shape and you're not, haven't been to the gym for a while, you're not going to go and run 30 minutes on a treadmill. Not going to happen. You might, but you're probably not going to feel great about it. But you know what? You might be able to do 3 to 5 minutes. Maybe you can do a small amount of time. And then we incrementally get stronger and healthier and we're able to do more. Homework's really not that different. It's the same thing. It's a mental exercise. So let's build that. The other thing that you said, Paul, that kind of cued me was this idea of rewards. And I know a lot of times for parents, they kind of go like, I want to reward my kid for everything that they do. And I get that. I don't think that's what we're really saying either. But sometimes we need external motivation. Um, Many times people go to jobs because they get paid, not because they necessarily want to go to their job. Rewards are something that can be important. I'm not a big fan of um, financial things. Like I don't like buying kids things for their rewards. I talk to parents all the time about social rewards. So um, I if you ever listen to our podcast, we often use the word connection, and connections I think super important with our kids. And so social rewards can be something as simple as um, hey, you know what? Let's have a good night of homework. And then maybe you can teach me how to play Fortnite. Um, then we're tying a connection with our kids to something they like. Um, I played many games of Mario Kart when my kids were growing up, and not because I was great at Mario Kart, although I did become pretty good at Mario Kart over time. But it was really out of the fact that my daughter was into it, and so it was a good way for us to connect. My time with her was a reward, and the game reward. So we were able to kind of tie it together. So think about those things. Maybe it's, hey, we'll watch a movie together, or maybe we'll go outside and play basketball. Social rewards can be really incredible. When my kids were really little, I was always surprised how simple sometimes social rewards could be, where I would say, okay, I'm just going to write down what the reward's going to be, and we're going to put it in an envelope. And it could be something as simple as, oh, today you're going to get a high five. And they would be super excited about the high five because it was just the action of it. So when we think about this idea of rewards, don't overthink it. It doesn't mean you got to spend $100 on a video game. It doesn't mean you have to buy it. It can be really simple things. It can be, hey, we're going to make pizza together because that's your favorite food. I love anything that's going to connect you with your kids, and I don't care if they're 5 years old or 18 years old. I have a high school daughter, and when things are going well, we go out for coffee. That's what she likes, and it's so we'll say, hey, you know what? It's been a really tough week. You've been doing really, a lot of things, doing things well. Let's go down and grab a cappuccino or macchiato or whatever the drink of the day is. But it gives me time with her. And so it's rewarding for me too. Makes parenting a lot easier. And despite the fact your kids might get angry with you about making them do homework, they want that time with you too. Their anger is not really suggesting they don't buy into that. You just got to get to it a different way.
Let's move a little bit to another topic
Sure.
here.
Yeah.
Let's reach about anxiety and depression. So what are some of those, how would you know your child has anxiety or depression? Or sometimes parents will say to me, my child comes home and goes upstairs to the room and doesn't come out. How do I approach that? Is that true anxiety, depression? How would you, some suggestions for parents
So,
in
so
those
Paul, maybe
scenarios?
let's kind of talk a little bit about maybe what parents should look for
Mhm.
anxiety and depression first, and then let's talk about that
Yep.
communication because I think that's a big piece. You want
Yeah.
to take? Let's talk about anxiety first.
Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
it.
What's your thoughts?
So when I'm talking with parents, like, and if they're coming and seeing, like, we're typically already identifying a concern. I think it happens every once in a while when we're maybe being overreactive or responsive and we're identifying anxiety where it isn't. But a lot of times, if I'm talking with parents and maybe they're engaging with like, hey, their sibling is demonstrating this behavior or something along those lines, is this something I should be concerned about? Some of those markers that I really try to look at is one, where are we seeing changes? So if we're seeing changes in their social interactions, if we're seeing changes in grades, if we're seeing changes in energy, like just noting change and what is their response to it. Sometimes that change can even be potentially be seen as a positive. Oh, hey, their grades are going up. Um, but then they're coming in and they are going right to bed and they're saying that they're exhausted or, they're spending hours and hours and hours on homework. Hey, that might be anxiety going on. We might be having some obsessive, thought patterns surrounding perfectionistic tendencies. And so that might be something to worry about. I like to identify symptoms of anxiety, really focusing on the physiological symptoms. So, panic is something that is oftentimes misrepresented as, heart attacks. I've had close personal friends who've called ambulances because they thought they were having a heart attack.
Mhm.
No, they were having a panic attack. And so, I like to think of panic attacks as like um, this intense manifestation of anxiety, but those principles are still there. It's going to be the rapid heartbeat. It's going to be this thought process where it ends up being we kind of enter into that fight or flight stage. It ends up being something where maybe we start having rapid and shallow breaths and we can't, we maybe start to feel like we can't concentrate. All of those are experiences of anxiety. Um, all of those physiological symptoms, though, they're going to be hard to really recognize. There's been individuals who have had panic attacks in a session, and I didn't recognize it until afterwards they told me. So a lot of it, I think, comes down to our communication with our children, which Carolyn, like when our children are going up in their room, like well, I really wanted to kind of talk on that here soon with, you know, we're then just in the dark. So
Mm.
if we're engaging and communicating and they're talking about things being, um, on their mind and they just cannot let go of it, or um, they are really putting a lot of pressure and they're not really sure what to do. Those are when I'm talking with parents about, hey, this might be time for interventions, or talking about different support systems that they can work with. How about for you, Ray?
Yeah, I think with anxiety, I think one thing I would maybe kind of want to make sure we are clear is that anxiety is okay. It's a normal emotion. We all have it. We all should have it. It motivates us. So if we're not a little anxious about losing our job, we might miss a whole lot of days, or if we're not a little anxious about doing things. So there's a motivating factor. So when we talk about it from a mental health standpoint, um, some anxiety is good, but when anxiety gets to a point where it's changing function, so when Paul was saying about like kind of looking for those changes, so yeah, if your kid's been social for a while and then now all of a sudden they're now going to their room, that's a change of function. If they were passing and now they're failing, that's a change of function. If they're so busy doing homework they can't interact with friends, that's a change of function. So we want to really look for those times um, that we're seeing those kind of changes. That's when we want to start at least kind of thinking about it. Thinking about, okay, maybe we need to do something. That physiology piece, um, you know, it, it's easy to give your kids some time to relax. Work with them like, hey, we just need a break. I say that to my family all the time. Like, hey, we just need to veg out tonight. Like, this is a night we just need to not think about homework or not do those things. Relaxation can be good. Yeah, gosh, if you Google anything about mindfulness or relaxation, you will find tons of resources. They have a bunch of apps for that. So there's a lot of apps that you can use. Probably the most well-known is one called Calm. That's just a great thing just to let people relax, whether it's an adult or a kid. It can be helpful. The other thing I just kind of mentioned, Paul mentioned the physiology. One of the things I look for in kids is the worry. So I think the other part of anxiety, there's that physical piece, but the worry piece, and you can tell in your kids by their language. Um, they're saying like, what if this happens, or what if that happens, or what if, you know, it's, you know, I always say anxiety is a disorder of what ifs. So it's constantly worrying about what's the next thing that could possibly occur. That's when you want to start paying a little attention to it. If it's just happening once in a while, yeah, you just want to monitor it. But if it's something where you do see again that kind of change in their performance, or maybe they're now not wanting to engage in extracurricular activities, then it's time to maybe reach out for a little bit of help. But a little bit of anxiety is a good thing. You don't want to take it completely away. We do need a little bit of that to keep us motivated. How about depression? Let's maybe kind of talk. Let's talk about that one
Yes.
too. So we hit the anxiety one, but yeah. So Paul,
Um,
let you go.
and maybe to kind of pull back, and I wish I would have started with kind of that what anxiety is and what it isn't,
Yeah.
and similar with depression. And depression isn't, oh, my kid has a bad mood today, or so they're depressed. Um, Depression has prevalence and a pattern there to it, and if we're thinking about, when depression ends up coming in terms of diagnostically, usually it's tied in with specific events. Not always, or it could be many different events, but there's things going on that's generating a depressive response. There's other diagnoses that don't necessarily have that component, but some of the more common dynamics that I'm talking with parents and children, usually surrounding loss, surrounding sadness, and like that is if anxiety is that worry or that what if, um, depression I hear is the so what, or what can I do about it,
Mm.
kind of language. And so it's, hey, you have a test tomorrow, don't you want to say whatever, what's the point? It's this kind of pulling back and withdrawing, and in a similar way it's kind of the manifestation of, it's similar to anxiety and fear, depression and sadness. um, so I look for feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and that can be in school, that can be in social situations, that can be in sporting events. Um, Usually, lack of interest in things that we know that they enjoy. So if we're seeing that, hey, they were all about soccer or baseball, football, and now it's they're dreading going, or they're skipping practices, they're not showing up. Um, that's when we're wanting to be concerned. If they're exhausted after a day of school and they don't want to go, it's understandable. If it's a week and they're starting to pull back, that might be noteworthy. Maybe even after, before the week mark, I'm starting to take notice. But we're looking for a pattern here.
Yeah.
It can be There can be a reduction of appetite. There can be an increase in appetite. Again, looking for just those changes. And a lot of times we'll see that there's a lack of care for themselves. So maybe it's I'm not showering, I'm not taking care of personal hygiene. My grades are slipping. My room becomes messier. My appearance becomes a bit more disheveled because, again, what's the point? So those are some of the markers that I try to look for and identify with parents, especially if they're unsure if they should be, seeking treatment or seeking that support systems. But Ray, what are the things that
Yeah,
you look for?
I think you're spot on. I mean, I kind of think the same ways. Again, sadness is okay. Sometimes we can over pathologize normal emotions. If kids have a breakup and they're sad for a few days or a few weeks, that happens. I mean, it's part of how we deal with emotions. There's a grief process. But as Paul said, it really is that pattern that we want to kind of pay attention to. Um, yeah, Carolyn, you said something about like how do we communicate with, or how do we
Once
get
you
kids to
realize
talk about it? Yeah.
that pattern, and they continue to go to their room and they're not coming out, and how do you approach your child, or how do you get a conversation
Yeah.
with them
So, I mean,
engaged?
it depends on the kid. But I guess maybe I'm going to start a little preventative. So, if your kids aren't having problems, that's the best time to start talking to them about the problems. Have open discussion about their feelings. If something happens at school and they're upset, um, you know, put your phone down, and talk to them and listen to them. And yeah, this is going to be this is hard advice, but don't try to solve it for them. If a child comes to school or comes home from school and they're like, oh, so and so picked on me, and a parent gets irate, then the next time if the kid's afraid they're going to be embarrassed because mom's going to call school or something, they won't tell you again. So sometimes they just want to be heard, and it's hard. Like, I mean, I listen to everybody else's kids all day long, and with my own kids, they'll tell me something. The first thing I want to do is, well, you can do this, and I have to kind of say, well, hold on, like let's just pause a second. And I think I've realized with my own kids, they don't always want answers. Sometimes they just want to be heard. And I mean, I've had my kids tell me things, and I just go, "Yeah, I get it. You know what? Being a kid's hard. Um, and if you want me to help you, let's talk about how we can do that together. But I won't solve it for you. We can figure out what's the right path for us to do." And it might not happen at that moment. I've had my kids that I say that and they go, okay, okay. And it's days later and they might come back and say, all right, it's time. Like I need to do something about it. And so you got to be patient. And I'll tell you, it's hard as a parent. I hear my kids tell me they're upset. I want to take all that emotion away, but sometimes just listen. Try not to react. If we react, sometimes that shuts them down more than anything else. So it's really just about taking time and listening, and start early. Start before it happens. And so, always take time to do that with your kids if you can. If your child's already in it, and they're already at a point the anxiety's high or the depression's high, um, find kind of safe times to talk. Um, Driving in the car, again, I go and get something to eat and sit in a restaurant and just have a casual conversation, um, and try not to interview about them.
So how would you bring that up? Because
Yeah.
sometimes the parent, you just don't know how to start and you think too much and you say the wrong thing.
Yeah,
So-
and I do it all the time. I say the wrong thing with my kids always, so that happens. It, I always try to not interview my kids. Like it's like so you got to it's not and watching making a judgment saying you look depressed today. All of a sudden, if they're not feeling depressed and it's something else, that conversation's over. So
Mhm.
so for me, I'll often say something like, you know what, something's been different. I don't know what's going on. I'm here if there's something I can help you with. Um, you know, I will listen and not make any judgment. Usually they roll their eyes and say that I probably will, and sometimes I still do. We do that, but um, when you kind of integrate it in that way into the conversation where it's just, hey, I'm just worried about you. Um, I just want, if I can listen, that's great. If I can help you, I will, but I won't give you advice about it. I'm not going to sit here and try to solve it. But if you just need an ear, that's not a friend. And they may not take you up on it the first time, and that's okay. And you just approach it again.
Yeah. Um, I'm a fan of the idea of trying to have, like, let's call ourselves out as parents. Like when I'm talking with my stepdaughters about something that feels uncomfortable, I like to say, hey, I feel uncomfortable asking this, but I still want to ask you. And,
Yeah,
I think it's a great way of like showing like, hey, let's that kind of primes them. And, it might be, hey, I'm noticing this. What would you like, what would you like me to do? Or I think I could do this and I think it would be helpful, like, in terms of the way I'm responding to them. Um, would you like me to try that? Or does that feel like it would be, would it help? Would it not? Do you want me to just drop it? And sometimes like I do want to kind of be err on the side of caution where it's like if we're asking and we're getting a no, respect the no as best we can.
yeah,
If I'm asking like, hey, can I ask, can I say something that might be hard to hear? No, I really want to say it anyway. But being able to say, okay, now's not the time.
right.
If it's something important, I might circle back. At some point, I do have to come back and say, but it doesn't have to be right now.
Yeah,
And letting there be this awareness of like, hey, there's a conversation coming, because no one likes to have like be all of a sudden they're walking in the door from school. Hey, we have to talk. And I
right.
think adults, if we hear this conversation, like we have to talk conversation, like
Mhm.
my heart sinks, you know, my
Mhm.
stomach kind of feels those anxiety symptoms. Um,
Mhm.
but letting them know and kind of preparing them and sharing, like, hey, sometime this weekend, um, I'm noticing some things and I just want to talk about it and see where you're at with that. You know, can we find some time? And maybe it is, you know, out for that cup of coffee
Yeah.
or, you know, on that drive, but letting them know to, so that way they can kind of be ready and they're not then on the spot and have to make, you know, be like, you know, in the moment trying to share and fumble through the wording, but they can take some time. And in some ways, not just having this open ended, like, hey, I want to talk, but maybe it's, hey, I've been noticing that, you know, we haven't really been connecting as much. I'm seeing some things that are happening. I just want to check in with you and see what's going on because I'm concerned. So we're giving them some context for what's going on, so that way they're not again just getting
Yeah.
blindsided by it.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, making sure that we accept the no. I mean, I think that's, I've worked with families that they get into a power struggle over emotions, and where the child will be like, no, I don't want to talk about it, and they go, fine, be miserable. Not a good response. You have to just kind of accept it and just again kind of say, I like when you said like, hey, I'm going to revisit this again. I think that's important. And you might revisit it every day, and that's okay. You just gotta. That if you don't react, they will be more open. I think the other thing that's maybe important when you're talking to kids is um, understanding their emotions doesn't mean telling them the stories about how you went through the same thing. Um, it will shut them down. So it's now I'm going to qualify that in a second. But if they, if they're saying, gosh, I'm having a hard time with friends, you go, oh well, I went through the same thing. They're going to just tune that out, and it's kind of wow, what's that like? Man, I know it's hard being a teenager. It's hard being a fourth grader, and just really kind of reflecting back if they are going through something like depression and anxiety at some point, not the first time they talk to you about it, if you have gone through similar things, you can connect on that and say, hey, I didn't tell you this before, but I've had panic attacks, and if you'd be interested, I can share some things that worked for me, or what helped me, and that can be a really good thing. That just probably is not a good thing the first time you're having that conversation. That really should come out over time. And again, first conversation, don't try to solve it as much as you want. Just listen, hear their story, connect with them, let them know, hey, I get it. It's tough. I say all the time, I don't know if I could be a kid in today's world. What that was like going through COVID and the online education and all of those things that we all kind of were living at the same time. I don't know what that would have been like if I was 8. So I try to tell them, hey, I don't understand it. You're dealing with things I didn't have to deal with. When I was a teenager, I didn't deal with social media. I don't know what it's like to make a mistake and then 100 people see it in 2 minutes. It's just a different world. So listen, I think that's the
Yeah.
key.
And I, to your point of like not oversharing our experiences, the other piece of that is not dismissing because of our experience. I
Sure.
cannot tell you the number of times I'm, you know, talking with a parent and, you know, it's, you know, well, when I was their age or back in, you know, back when I was in high, like, and, you know, that is such a powerful and important statement for the parent that the child has absolutely no context for.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense for the parent. And then it almost kind of creates more conflict potentially if they're not getting it. You know, so hey, I dealt with worse than you, you know, at this point. So why are you like, why are you so upset or what's going on? And really having to recognize like that's a different thing. You know, we're not, you know, that's a
Mhm.
thing for you and you're seeing a connection there, but we can't, you know, we can't hold an expectation for them if they don't really have any context for it. So, and I'm thinking even back towards like grades and homework and things like that. But when you shared that, that felt like an important piece that I
Mhm.
hear a lot and trying to reframe that for parents because it feels so important for them, but it really just kind of shuts off listening.
Mhm.
So it sounds like not being defensive,
Yeah.
no matter
Yeah.
what area you're approaching with your child.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's, you gotta, and it's easy to do that. It's easy,
Mhm.
and I'll tell you, some of the hardest things I've heard as a parent are when my kids say that I've done something wrong. Um, and I have to set back and go, okay, like it's their perception. There's times I don't think I'm wrong, but over time, I'm glad my kids can call me out on things. That again, it opens up communication, and I have been wrong. Yeah, there's times where, I have a high school daughter, and I tell the story often. She wanted to do some activities in high school that I thought she was too busy to do, and I kept shutting it down and shutting it down. And she's like, Dad, I just really want to do this. And I'm like, you get the consequence though. Like you start doing extra activities. Um, you still have homework. You still have all these things. And she pulled it off like a champ. She did. I don't know how she did it, but she did. And so I had to step back and go, okay, hey, I was wrong on that one. Like, and it's okay to be wrong. I mean, I think when we listen to our kids, and not that we have to say we're wrong all the time, but if we maybe jump the gun on something and saying, hey, I handled that the wrong way. I've said that many times with my kids, where they'd come to me with something and I've gone, you know what, I reacted the wrong way, I should have done it differently. And that opens the door, I think, for communication too, when you can kind of say that sometimes and recognize maybe you said the wrong thing and admit that to them.
And I could not agree more with what you're saying there, right? And even the just said something of opens the door for communication. And I really think that whether it's in talking with anxiety or depression, opening the door is what we're really trying
So,
to do here. They don't need to walk through it immediately, but if we're letting them know, hey, we're not going to shut you down, we're not going to judge you. If you're choosing to walk through this door, we will meet you there. And I, in my own relationships, trying to, you know, using that language of like, hey, it's a door open. If they want to walk through it, that's great. But I want them to at least know that that's an opportunity that they can take. Yeah.
so
Is-
Carolyn, it looks like we might have time for one more question, like a quick hour. So,
That was a quick hour.
so
Well, in your experiences working, with the students, and do you share any positive outlets with them, like good things for them to do when they're feeling in any of these areas?
oh, I think that's a great question. There's so many positive things, even when we feel negative. And I talk to kids about that all the time. That I mean, honestly, part of treatment in all mental health difficulties is building what we say are pleasurable activities, things that they might be interested in, and that at times it's maybe hard to find something that they want to do, and it might be something really simple. I had a teenager that I'm working with who the other day she was like, I just can't get anything that motivates me. And I said, then just do one simple good thing for somebody else every day. Hold a door. It can be that simple. And just pay attention for the fact that you did something that helped someone else out. And I'm going to take Paul's word on momentum. It was interesting. About 2 weeks into it, um, she realized she felt good when she held the door for somebody and somebody said thank you. And so then she was like, man, I really felt good. So I kept doing it. And then you know, she saw somebody maybe drop something and she would hustle over to pick it up. And all of a sudden, these like little positive actions she took built momentum. Um, did that cure the depression? No. Um, did that make her feel good for part of the day? Sure. It broke the cycle a little bit. And so yeah, there's all kinds of things. If they like doing something, great. They can find that. But if they can't, there's so many simple things. It's I love reading what's called positive psychology research, and the idea of doing um, kind acts of kindness is amazing. How much better it makes people feel, and how it can be preventative. So even if we start with something that simple, but and any positive activity they can get involved in. Exercise and sleep are also wonderful. There's big research that came out this week that one of the best treatments of depression is exercise. So if we get out and do 30 minutes, 5 days a week of taking a walk and getting our heartbeat, pounding, it can make our mood better. Again, is that going to be the treatment by itself? No, but it's part of the puzzle.
I'm going to throw nutrition in there as well, and um, I I think not necessarily, diet and exercise are, common when we're talking of like weight loss dynamics, but diet, weight loss, or yeah, diet, exercise, and sleep are like fundamental core pieces that are just going to leave you feeling better. Referenced Mario Kart earlier, and that's actually a metaphor that I'll use a lot of times, especially with kids, where if they're struggling and they're feeling low energy or anxiety, depression, even ADHD, talking with them about, hey, do you know that at the very beginning of Mario Kart, when it starts from 3 and it goes right to 2, and if you hit the start, like you get a little boost off the start. And they're like, yeah, I'm like, you have decent diet, sleep, and exercise. That's what you get.
Mm.
Doesn't mean you're going to win the race, but it means you're starting your day off with a boost. But if we don't have those things, it can feel like we kind of do like the little burnout thing at the very beginning. It makes it a much slower start and makes it just that much harder to catch up with everyone else. And they get it, that they get that connective piece. So I certainly want to echo that. Um, and to build off of that, like that, how do we engage with interest and the positive support structures? Um, I like to really like being able to understand. So if it's if I really enjoy social interactions, but I'm pulling myself back from that, um, that's really an area to focus in on. So what are the areas that we've withdrawn from that we know we enjoy, and how do we make space for that? A lot of times when I'm working with individuals or teens who are demonstrating depression, they're like, no, I'm just not happy. And I'd like to talk. Happiness is a byproduct, or we're just not neutrally happy. We
Mm.
have to work towards happiness. And one of the best ways to feel happy is to do something that we enjoy, and happiness is then a byproduct of doing that thing we enjoy. And I don't think that we oftentimes think of it that way, but when if I it's the if I really enjoy playing a game with friends, um, that makes me happy. But I'm not doing. My goal isn't happiness. My goal is hanging out or doing playing a game with
Mm.
friends. So trying to really focus on the activities and identifying happiness as a byproduct, I think, is a valuable thing.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it there's as parents we can't necessarily judge what the kids find as that thing that brings them that happiness either. Like
Yeah.
there's some things that I go, wow, is that really something they somebody would be interested in? But for it's a unique experience. So yeah, I mean, start small. I mean, I think that's the other piece. Have kids try something that's a little different and small. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to put them in an organized sport or something to that nature to start with.
Yeah.
It can be something really simple. And I'm going to come back to this again is it can even be with us as parents, where maybe it's, you know what, why don't we just watch some YouTube videos of people doing something silly, or whatever it might be. It's, or let's look up some wild recipe and let's try to cook it together and see if we like it. Think out of the box, do something a little different. And again, small things build momentum. I think that's important.
All right.
So, Carolyn, thanks for
Thank
giving
you.
us this opportunity to spend some time and chatting. And I hope everyone out there, um, found something that we said
Mhm.
maybe useful in your time with your kids. For those of you who are listening, and maybe there's something you want to kind of re-listen to, we are going to put a recorded version of this um, under our Psych to Practice podcast. You can go online to get that. Or if you go to Apple Music, Spotify, really any kind of streaming service, you would be able to access that. It probably would be up.
Probably with not this week, but I think we're probably can release it then next week.
So
with-
something next week.
yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you all. And Carolyn, maybe
Thank
we
you.
can do this again.
I would love
Yeah.
to. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, everyone, thanks for listening.
Yeah. And be well and stay psyched.